Hey, sir, a little boy called out. There's a picture of you in my mom's bag. Ethan Caldwell, the man, stopped in his tracks when he saw the boy's mother. As the late afternoon sun went down, spreading a warm golden glow over the vast greenery, the city park was full of people. Kids' laughter could be heard from the playground. Dogs barked happily, and couples walked hand in hand along the winding trails. The world seemed to be moving with a sense of slow, happy joy, which was very different from Ethan Caldwell's normal life. What happens next will shock everyone. But before we start, let's do something fun. Comment your location below. Let's see who's watching from the farthest place. All right, let's begin. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket. It seemed like an odd thing to do on a relaxing walk, but Ethan had never really understood what it meant to be relaxed. He was the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, so his life was full of meetings, important choices, and the constant hum of his phone. Today, though, he had left it behind, a rare treat for being by himself. But as he walked through the park, the strange quiet made the pain of being alone that he refused to admit get worse. He stopped by a big oak tree and watched some kids chase bubbles blown by a street artist. He was interested in a little boy with sandy hair, not because he was different from the others, but because he was so excited about chasing the sparkling balls. His laughter filled the room. It was a pure, unrestrained sound that made Ethan smile out of the blue. There was a woman sitting on a bench nearby. She had her eyes on the boy and a well-worn book. It was kind of her to sit, with one leg crossed over the other, and her dark hair framed a pretty face. Ethan had never seen her seem so at ease before, and he couldn't help but stay and watch the scene play out like a scene from a simpler time he had never known. When the kid finally caught a bubble, he turned to show everyone, but Ethan was there instead. They looked at each other for a moment, with the boy tilting his head as if he were trying to remember a face. The child then ran over without thinking, his sneakers making a soft sound on the gravel walk. The boy craned his neck to look up at Ethan and said, "Hey, sir." He looked with wide, blue eyes that were full of wonder. "My mom has a picture of you in her purse." Ethan blinked, shocked to the core. He knelt down a bit to meet the boy's eyes and asked, "She does? Are you sure it's me?" The boy gave a strong nod. "Yes, I saw it, but it's getting old. It makes you look younger, but it's still you." Ethan's thoughts were going fast. He had been through a lot of strange things, but this was something completely new. Who was the mother of this boy? Also, why does she have an old picture of him? That was not something that could be ignored. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "What's your name?" Ethan asked in a softer voice. "Charlie," the boy was proud to say. "That's my dog over there. His name is Max. Do you want to see him pull off a trick?" Ethan laughed because he was really impressed by how honest the boy was. "Perhaps in a minute. Charlie, could you tell me where your mom is?" Charlie showed the woman where to sit on the bench. Now she was looking at them, and her face went from being calm to alert. She tensed up a little, as if she were getting ready to step in. Charlie said, "That's her. Her name's Mom, but other people call her Clara." Ethan's chest got tight. Clara. That name kept coming back to him, even though he hadn't heard it in over 10 years. Is that Clara for real? The one he knew a long time ago, before his life became a blur of success and sacrifice? It didn't seem possible to think that, but as he got closer, the familiarity of her face hit him like a bolt of lightning. "I think I need to meet your mom," Ethan said in a more serious voice. He just shrugged it off as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. "Okay, come on." He grabbed Ethan's hand right away and pulled him toward the bench. Ethan followed. It made his heart beat faster than any business deal or argument he had ever been in. He thought his past was dead, but each step brought him closer to it. He might not be ready to face his past yet. When they got close, Clara got up, leaving her book on the bench. When they got close, there was no doubt. It was her. Her features had become softer over time, but the quiet power in her eyes hadn't changed. She looked at him with a mix of shock and fear in her eyes, holding on tight to the strap of her purse like it was lifeblood. She spoke softly, "Ethan," and her voice was full of doubt. "Clara," he said, his voice dry. "It's been a long time." For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of an unspoken past hung between them. Clara finally tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Ethan said, turning his attention to Charlie. "But it seems your son has an interesting way of starting conversations." Clara's face turned red, and she looked down at Charlie, who was busy showing a small group of kids Max's newest trick. "I'm sorry he caused you trouble." "He's just interested," Ethan quickly said. "Don't worry about it." "But he mentioned something about a picture?" Clara got a stronger hold on her bag. She spoke too quickly when she said, "It's nothing. Just an old photo." "An old photo of me?" Ethan pressed on, his interest mixed with something deeper that he couldn't quite put his finger on. "Why would you still have that?" Clara paused and looked away quickly. "It's complicated." Ethan wanted to push her and demand answers, but the way she looked made him stop. He moved back to give her space instead. "Sorry to bother you. It's just strange." She nodded, and her shoulders loosened up a bit. "I get it. It's just, Mom." Charlie ran back over with Max's leash in his hand and cut in. Max pulled off his trick. "Look, did you see?" Clara looked down at him with a smile, and for a moment her stress went away. "Yes, honey, I saw." "Well done." Even as Ethan watched the conversation, he felt something strange pulling at him. It was both beautiful and sad to see how close they were to each other. Clara said, "I should go," and her voice cut through his thoughts. "Ethan, it was great to see you." "Really?" Ethan stepped forward and said, "Wait, may I talk?" "Only for a short time." Clara wasn't sure what to do and looked down at Charlie, who was already looking at an ice cream cart nearby. She finally gave a nod. "All right, not here, though." When Clara led Charlie away, Ethan nodded. He felt a strange mix of relief and fear. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that this chance meeting was going to pull apart a thread he hadn't even known was loose. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see where it led for the first time in years. In Clara's choice, the coffee shop was tucked into a quiet street corner, away from the busy park. Its warm inside was softly buzzing with the sound of espresso machines and whispered talks. There would be no one else around at the table Clara chose near the back. Even though his mind was running, Ethan did what she said, and his face stayed calm. While they talked, Charlie sat between them and happily ate a chocolate chip cookie that Clara had bought for him. Max was happy and still as he lay at his feet. Ethan saw that Clara had her hand over her purse and was firmly holding on to the leather strap. It looked like she was protecting the contents of the purse from everyone, or maybe just from him. At first, neither of them spoke. Clara kept her eyes on Charlie and brushed some crumbs off of his shirt. Ethan, on the other hand, just kept looking at her. She looked a lot like a woman he knew from years ago, but she was also different. Time had left behind thin lines on her face that had made her features less sharp. But that was clear from the way she looked at him and the way she stood, quiet confidence. Ethan finally spoke up. His voice was quiet but steady. "You haven't changed much." Clara let out a soft laugh that wasn't funny. "I'm not sure if that's true, but I appreciate the sentiment." "How long has it been?" he asked as he leaned back in his chair. 15 years? Even though he was being easygoing, the question had a weight to it that he couldn't hide. "Closer to 20, Clara corrected. She looked into his eyes for a moment before turning her gaze away. "It's been a long time." Ethan gave her a nod, taking in what she said. 20 years. I didn't think it was possible. He had last seen her right before they became adults, and they were both full of dreams and plans that didn't seem likely to change. Things didn't always go as planned in life, though. He said, "I never thought I'd see you again, let alone in a park, through your son." Clara tensed up a little and put her hand tighter on her bag. "Life is funny that way." Ethan looked down at the bag because he knew the picture was still inside. He was hesitant because he didn't want to go too far, but his interest was too strong to ignore. "Charlie brought up a picture," he said slowly, "of me, from our younger years." Clara stopped moving, and a thin line formed between her lips. She didn't answer right away because she was busy wiping Charlie's hands with a napkin. Ethan stood there, aware that the stress between them was rising. She finally said, "It's nothing." But her voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Just an old picture," he said in a soft voice. "I'd like to see it, if you don't mind." That's when Clara's eyes caught on his. For a split second, he saw something raw and scared in her face. Her voice was tense as she asked, "Why? Why does it matter?" She said something that caught Ethan off guard. So he stopped. He carefully chose his words as he said, "Because I'm curious. Because it's strange to think that after all these years, you'd still have something like that." Her eyes kept going back and forth between Ethan and Charlie, who was now focused on the drawing he had started on a napkin. After a long time, she finally sighed and reached into her purse. It looked like she was giving herself time to think about what she was doing by moving slowly and carefully. She didn't stop, though. After a short time, she took out a small, slightly creased picture and put it on the table between them. When Ethan picked it up, the picture made him gasp for air. He hadn't thought about that summer afternoon in years, but it was like a picture from another life. He stood next to Clara and smiled at the camera. They had their arms around each other's shoulders in a relaxed way. He looked too young to be true. His face was free of the lines and stress that made him who he was now. Clara also looked different, kinder and lighter. He said softly, "I remember this day," running his thumb along the edge of the picture. "It was right before I went to college. We went to the lake." Clara nodded, but it was hard to read her face. "You made me bring that old camera of yours. You told us we'd like pictures to remember." Ethan's chest got tight. "I didn't think you'd still have this." "I didn't." He couldn't quite place the tone of Clara's voice as she said, "For a long time. After many years, I found it hidden in an old book. That's not what I meant to do, but I just couldn't throw it away." He was shocked by how honest she was. "Why not?" he asked in a kinder voice. She thought for a moment and then looked down at the table. "Because it reminded me of a time when things were simpler, happier, before everything got so complicated." Ethan looked at her, and what she said hit him hard. They had grown so far apart, and he wanted to know what had gone wrong. He knew it, though, deep down. His drive to achieve had always been the most important thing to him. He was so focused on making plans for the future that he forgot about the things he was leaving behind. He started to say Clara, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. It was a quiet don't. "That was a long time ago, Ethan. There's no reason to look for it now." He pointed to the picture and said, "But there's obviously something here. Why else would you carry this with you?" "It's not what you think," she said in a strong voice, making it impossible to argue. "I kept it because it's a piece of my past, not because I'm still holding on to anything." Ethan leaned back and thought about what she said. She tried to avoid his eyes, which made him think there was more to the story than what she said. But he knew it wasn't a good idea to push her even more, at least not right now. Charlie looked up from his drawing all of a sudden, and his face was beaming with joy. "Hey, Mom, I drew Max." Clara smiled, and as she looked at him, the stress in her face went away. "That's great, honey. Max looks a lot like himself." Ethan stood there and watched the conversation in silence. He felt a strange mix of feelings. It was clear that Clara loved her son, and it made him feel something he couldn't quite put his finger on. A desire, maybe, for the kind of relationship he had avoided for years. Charlie went back to drawing, and Ethan took another look at Clara. "Thank you." He spoke softly as he moved the picture back across the table. "Thank you for showing me this." Clara gave a nod but didn't say anything. She stood up and put the picture back in her bag. She said, "We should go," in a calm but faraway voice. "It's getting late." Because he knew she wouldn't listen, Ethan tried to stop her and ask her to stay and talk. It was hard for her to take down the walls she had put up between them. He just stood there and smiled a little. He said, "It was nice to see you again." "Really?" While he looked at her, Clara looked away for a short time. "You too." As she picked up Charlie and Max, Ethan watched them walk away. The picture in his mind was still very clear. He didn't know what he was expecting to find today, but it wasn't this. A glimpse of a life he might have had, a life that was still looming over his present, and he thought about what might have been for the first time in years. Ethan could still hear Clara's voice in his head long after she had left the cafe. He had feelings he hadn't thought about in years when she said his name. It was a mix of surprise, caution, and something that wasn't said. The edges of the past started to creep into his thoughts as he walked back to his car. They were intense and out of the blue. He met Clara in his last year of high school, when life still seemed completely open and possible. There was something about her that could light up a room just by being there. Her knowledge and warmth made everyone feel welcome. Ethan, on the other hand, had been more quiet. He was an eager dreamer who was always planning the next move in his mind. At first, their relationship was pretty simple. They met by chance in the school library because they both loved reading. At first, the talks were just about books and life, but they quickly turned into something more. Clara could calm Ethan down, take him off his never-ending drive, and remind him to enjoy the moment. Last summer was a blur of long walks, late-night talks, and ideas they shared. Ethan was accepted to a well-known college on the other side of the country, and Clara had been there for him, even though they both knew what his leaving would mean. He had sad memories of their last days together. They promised to stay in touch and come whenever they could, but they couldn't keep their word. But life had a way of ruining even the best plans. His first year of college was packed with classes, internships, and meetings for networking. He barely had time for anything else. The number of calls and letters they sent decreased over time, until one day they quit altogether. Ethan didn't mean for her to get away. He told himself that his job had to come first and that he could go back to it later. But later never came. It seemed like it was too late for Ethan to go back once he understood what he had lost. He couldn't help but think about what might have happened if he had made different decisions as he stood in the quiet parking lot. Would they have stayed together? Would they have made a life for themselves and their family? The picture of Charlie's face came to mind. The boy had Claire's easy smile and lively good mood, but there was something else about him that Ethan couldn't quite put his finger on. He seemed familiar. The thought kept coming back to him, getting louder as time went on. When Ethan got home, his huge apartment felt even more empty than usual because it was so empty. He set his keys down on the counter and poured himself a drink. As he swirled the golden liquid in his glass, it caught the light. While he sat by the window and looked out at the city, his mind was on something else. Charlie. How old was he? 7, 8. As Ethan did the math in his head, the timeline got uncomfortably close to the last time he saw Clara. This made his chest tighten. It didn't make sense. Though, there was no doubt in her mind when she told him that Charlie wasn't his son. The thought wouldn't go away, though. Ethan reached for his phone and almost called her to demand an answer. He tried to go on, but stopped himself. What would he say? That he had been sitting alone and thinking about a child he had just met? The man couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance he was the boy's father. It was silly. Still, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that Clara had been lying about something. Unstoppable memories kept coming back to me. At the lake, he saw Clara laughing as she splashed him with water in her favorite light dress. He could hear her voice making fun of him for taking things too seriously and never just being. On their last night together, she put her head on his shoulder, and he could feel the sadness that was building between them even though they tried to act like nothing had changed. Ethan sat back in his chair and ran his hand through his hair. For years, he had told himself that his success was worth all the things he had given up. The long hours, the missed opportunities, and the time spent alone. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was right. The next day, he was already back at the park, but he couldn't explain why. He didn't think he would see Clara or Charlie again, but he needed to remember the moment they shared. He went back the same way, stopping at the bench where she had been sitting. The book she had been reading was still fresh in his thoughts, but the title was too faint for him to read. He was about to leave when a voice he knew stopped him. Ethan. When he turned around, he saw Clara standing nearby, with Charlie's hand on hers. She looked shocked to see him, but not completely mad. "Clara," he said, his heart beating faster. "I didn't think you'd be here." She said, "I could say the same thing," with a hint of a smile on her face. She felt Charlie pull on her hand. "May I see Max?" "Wait for him." It was Clara who said, "In a minute, sweetheart." When she looked back at Ethan, her face was serious. Ask yourself, why are you here? He said, I guess. I was hoping to run into you. I had a lot to say yesterday, but didn't have time. Clara sighed. Clara tensed up her shoulders. That's not a good idea, Ethan. He took a step closer and asked, why not? After 20 years, Clara, you can't just walk into my life without telling me anything and expect me not to have questions. She told him, I didn't show up in your life. I saw Charlie and you. We didn't plan this. Maybe not, he said, but I think we owe it to ourselves to have an honest talk now that it's over. Clara wasn't sure what to do and looked down at Charlie, who was getting antsy. She finally said, not here. Now is not the time. Then when? Ethan pushed. Because I'm not going to let this go. With a mix of anger and something else, something softer, she looked into his eyes. She said in a low voice, I don't know. I need to think about it. Ethan agreed with her answer, but it wasn't enough for him. All right. Clara, I'm not leaving though. Not this time. Clara didn't answer. She shook Charlie's hand instead and turned to leave, her steps quick and sure. Ethan watched them leave, his chest heavy with feelings and questions that hadn't been answered. He knew that this was just the beginning as he stood there, by himself again. Their past was coming apart, pulling him toward something he couldn't quite put his finger on yet. He felt scared and alive at the same time for the first time in years. Ethan looked up at the roof of his office, while his phone buzzed on the desk next to him. A stack of unsigned contracts was waiting for him, which is unusual for someone whose attention is always on the task at hand. His mind, on the other hand, was far away and stuck in a never-ending loop of questions with no solutions. The cautious look on Clara's face, the picture in her bag, Charlie's strange similarity to a person Ethan couldn't quite place. Every detail played over and over, and each thought drew him deeper into the web of options. By the end of the day, Ethan had decided what to do. Even though he knew it was bothersome, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that Clara was hiding something from him. He needed answers, and not just for himself. He also couldn't get rid of the thought that the way they met wasn't just an accident. The next morning, Ethan called Daniel Carter, a private detective he trusted, in a quiet way. Daniel used to work for Ethan's company and was usually in charge of figuring out corporate spying or checking out big deals. But this was not like other cases. Ethan leaned back in his chair and said, I need you to check into someone. Her name is Clara Evans. She lives in this city. Also there is her son, Charlie Evans. The other person on the line waited for a moment before Daniel answered. His tone was careful. This isn't for work, right? No, Ethan said honestly. It's about me. But please be careful with it. Don't go too far. Just learn as much as you can about their lives. Daniel agreed, and when the call finished, Ethan leaned forward and rubbed his forehead. The choice weighed on him right away. He had always valued Clara's freedom and didn't like the thought of breaking into her private space. But he told himself that was the only way to see the bigger picture, if there was one. There was a mix of sorrow and excitement in the air as the next few days went by slowly. Ethan did a lot of work to take his mind off of the questions, but they kept coming back. The knot in his chest got tighter every time he thought of Charlie's happy smile or Clara's unsure words. Then, late Thursday night, Daniel finally called. Daniel told them, I have the information you asked for. Can we go over it now? Even though Daniel couldn't see Ethan, he nodded. Let me hear you. Daniel started by saying, Clara Evans is a single mother. She works at a nearby hospital as a registered nurse. For the past 8 years, she's lived in the same small room and doesn't have any important financial ties, at least not to you or your business. There are no debts, loans, or other formal ties. Ethan felt a little better, but it only lasted a moment. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to hear, but the fact that they weren't interested in money calmed at least one of his fears. Clara hadn't come to him for money. Daniel went on. Charlie Evans is 8 years old and was born in this city. There was no father's name on his birth certificate. When Ethan heard that, his heart skipped a beat, but he tried to keep his cool. Go on. I think Clara has been taking care of him by herself since he was born. There are no records of plans for co-parenting and no claims for child support. She lives on her own, and everyone says she's doing a great job. They say she is nice, but private, and that even though she works long hours, she always finds time for Charlie. Close your eyes and picture Clara in her small apartment, working and being a mom with the same strength and drive he remembered from years ago. Deep down, the picture made him feel both respect and guilt. He was following his dreams, and she was making plans for her life without him. Do you want me to look into it more? After a while, Daniel asked. Ethan quickly said, "No. Enough of what you did." "Daniel, thank you." When the call was over, Ethan sat in silence and looked out his rooftop window at the city lights. Daniel's research gave him a picture of Clara's life, but it didn't solve the question that was bothering him the most. Why did she keep the picture? Why did she hide the fact that Charlie's dad was gay? Not the least of which is, could it be that Charlie was his son? The timeline came back to Ethan's mind. 8 years old. He had the baby about a year after he and Clara broke up. It wasn't not possible. However, Clara was adamant that Charlie wasn't his kid. He couldn't get rid of the thought that the birth certificate didn't have a father's name on it. Now I felt worse about bugging into her life. It was clear that Clara had worked hard to take care of her kid without depending on anyone, especially him. Even though her life was simple, it seemed full of love and security. What gave him the right to mess that up? But he couldn't get rid of the image of the picture. Clara's answer, that it was just a memory, felt like it was missing something. People didn't carry things that reminded them of someone they had forgotten. She cared about that picture. Even though she wasn't ready to say it, Ethan got a drink and sat down on the couch to enjoy the peace and quiet of his flat. He thought about the life he had made for himself, which was rich and successful, but lacking in many ways. Then he remembered Clara and Charlie. In just a few days, they had brought out a part of him that he had buried for a long time. Early the next morning, Ethan was outside of the hospital where Clara worked. Clara's face relaxed a little, but she didn't let down her guard completely. "Ethan, I'm not sure what you want, but I don't think you'll find it here." "Perhaps not," he said, "but I can't let this go without getting it." Even though his speech was steady, there was a sense of urgency in it. "Clara, why did you keep that picture? After all this time, why do you still have it?" She turned away, her jaw getting tight. "It's hard to explain." He dropped his voice and said, "Then explain it to me." "Because I've been wondering all week if letting you go was the right thing to do. I can't live with myself if I don't try to understand." When Clara looked at him, her eyes were filled with something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Pain, hunger, and maybe, just maybe, a spark of hope. She didn't answer, though. She sighed instead and looked at the doors to the hospital. She said in a soft voice, "I need to go back to work." "This is not possible at this time." Even though Ethan's chest hurt more, he nodded. He just said, "I'll wait." "When you're ready." Clara thought about it for a moment, then turned around and left, leaving Ethan standing there by himself, with more questions than solutions. That night, Ethan stood outside of Clara's apartment building, which was a simple brick building in a quiet area. The air was cool. Behind them, there was a slight buzzing sound of city life, far enough away to let the silence settle in. He was on the fence about coming, because he wasn't sure if showing up without warning would make Clara dislike him even more. But the questions that weren't answered kept him up at night. He needed to be clear. She had to fill in the blanks for him. Ethan rang the doorbell and waited. As footsteps came closer, his heart was pounding. She was there when the door slowly opened. Her face showed that she was both surprised and wary. Clara spoke softly and said, "Ethan." Before walking out into the hallway, she took a quick look back. "Ask yourself, why are you here?" He told her, "I had to see you. I couldn't let things stay the same." Clara sighed and ran her fingers along the doorframe, as if she wasn't sure if she should let him in or not. She finally gave a nod and moved out of the way. "Charlie is doing his homework in his room." "Don't shout." Ethan walked in and looked around the small but cozy living room. The furniture was simple and well-loved, but it was kept in good shape. There were a few framed pictures on the walls. Most of them were of Charlie, with his happy face shining from school pictures, casual shots, and a few quick snaps with Max. The apartment talked about a life built on love and hard work, and Ethan felt bad that he had been there. Clara motioned for him to sit down on the old couch, but she didn't. She stood by the window with her arms crossed instead. You could feel the stress in the room. She said in a soft voice, "You shouldn't be here. This isn't fair to either Charlie or me." "I know," Ethan said in a steady voice, "but that picture keeps making me think about everything we didn't say. Clara, I need to understand." She turned around to face him, anger flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean, Ethan? That I saved a picture from a time when I thought we might have been able to get together? That I kept it because it made me think of a happy time in my life, even if it was only temporary?" His gut was hit hard by what she said, but he kept looking at her. He said, "You didn't just keep it. You take it with you. People don't do that for memories they've moved on from." Clara laid her head back and took a deep breath. "Ethan, you have no idea what my life has been like. You have no right to say why I kept it. Don't worry about me," he said quickly. "Just, Clara, you're holding a picture of us while taking care of your 8-year-old son. The time doesn't make sense." Her face turned serious. "Charlie isn't your kid. Then tell me what it is about you that I expect you to say." Ethan pushed. "Because I can't stop wondering if I missed something or someone I should have known about." Clara rubbed her temples and spoke with a shaking voice. "Ethan, I already told you. There's no sign of Charlie's dad in the shot. He never was. That's all you need to think about it. Then why the picture?" "What did Ethan ask?" His voice got softer. "Why have you been carrying it around for so long?" Clara paused, and her defenses started to weaken a little. She sat down on the sofa across from him and fiddled with the bottom of her shirt. She began slowly, "Because it was the last time I thought I knew where my life was going. Things changed after you left. I didn't plan to be a mom by myself. I didn't mean to have to raise a child by myself while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. That picture made me think of a time when everything seemed possible, when I didn't feel like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders." Her voice cut off, and she quickly turned away and wiped her eyes. When Ethan leaned forward, his guilt was stronger than ever. He told Clara in a soft voice, "I'm sorry for everything I made you go through back then, for going without looking back. It seemed like the right thing to do. I was focusing on my future, but I see now how selfish that was." Her voice was heavy with feeling as she said, "It doesn't matter anymore. Both of us moved on. You and I have both made a life for ourselves." His words, "But it does matter," were firm. "I still care about you, even though we're no longer together. Charlie is important to me. I can't just ignore the chance. I told you," Clara said in a sharp voice. "Charlie isn't your son." It felt like her words were always going to be true, and Ethan leaned back, trying to accept them. Still, he had some doubts in the back of his mind. He carefully looked at her face, looking for any sign of doubt or a weak spot in the armor she wore so well. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then why not tell me about him sooner? Why not let me be part of your life, even as a friend?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the hallway where Charlie's room was. "Because it was easier this way," she admitted. "Easier to keep the past in the past. To let you go without dragging you into something you didn't ask for." Ethan's chest tightened. "But what if I wanted to be part of it?" She shook her head, her expression weary. "You don't understand, Ethan. When I found out I was pregnant, I had to make decisions on my own. I couldn't count on anyone else to step up. Not you, not anyone. And I've done my best to give Charlie the life he deserves." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her she hadn't given him a chance. But he knew it wasn't fair to question the choices she had made under circumstances he couldn't fully comprehend. "I'm not here to take anything away from you," he said finally. "I just want to understand, to know the truth." Clara looked at him with eyes that seemed to be filled with tiredness and guilt, but she didn't say anything. She stood up and walked to the window, where she stared out at the street. "The truth is," she said in a low voice, "I kept a picture because I needed a reminder of what I used to believe in, about the person I used to be. That's all it means." It felt like a wall was coming down between them. They couldn't get through it or move. Ethan stood there, his heart heavy from all the things that were not said. He said in a soft voice, "I don't know if I believe that, but I'll respect it." For now, Ethan knew it was time to leave when Clara didn't turn around. He walked to the door and stopped for a moment before leaving. "Clara," he spoke in a strong but kind voice, "if you ever want to tell me more, if there's ever anything you need, I'll be here." But she kept her back to the window and nodded. The door clicked shut behind Ethan as he left. As he walked down the hall and into the night, he couldn't get rid of the idea that the truth was still just out of reach, waiting for the right time to come out. A week had passed since Ethan's visit to Clara's apartment, but the event still gnawed at the edges of his mind. Even though he worked hard, he couldn't get rid of the worries and questions that were still present. He saw Clara's guarded face every time he closed his eyes, along with Charlie's happy smile. Still, something didn't seem right. Then one night, Ethan's phone rang with a call from a number he didn't know. He normally wouldn't have answered. It could wait or be sent to his helper first. But this call felt different in some way. He picked up, and his voice was rough from being so interested. "Ethan Caldwell." "This is Isla," the person on the other end of the line said slowly. "Clara's sister." Ethan stopped moving. That name hadn't come up in years. Isla had been the caring older sister when he and Clara were together. She always looked out for Clara and didn't always agree with Ethan's drive to succeed. He said, "Isla," but was careful. "It's been a long time." She agreed, her voice soft but strong. "It has," she said. "I hope it's okay for me to get in touch with you. I had been thinking about it for a while, but I finally spoke up." The phone was held tighter by Ethan as he leaned forward. "What's this about?" Isla said, "It's about Clara." "And Charlie." His breath shook. "What about them?" There was a long pause. Isla's voice was rough when she spoke again. "I know that my sister hasn't been telling you the truth. She has her reasons, but I believe you should know the truth." While he waited for her to go on, Ethan's heart was racing. "Charlie is your son." He was shocked when the words hit him like a freight train. He wasn't able to speak or think for a moment. It was like the world had turned on its axis and changed everything he thought he knew in an instant. His voice was barely above a whisper as he said, "That's not possible." "Clara told me. She said he wasn't mine." Isla told her straight out. "She's been lying. She didn't want to tell you because she believed it would make your life worse. Back then, you were so focused on your job and making a name for yourself. She thought that you would have to stay if you knew about Charlie, and she didn't want to stop you." Ethan's chest got tight, and he felt both anger and sadness. "She didn't think I had the right to make that choice for myself. She thought she was doing the right thing," she said. "Ethan, you need to get it." Clara was scared. It was her first time being a parent, and she was young and by herself. She didn't wish to bother you. It seemed like too much time had passed by the time she thought about telling you. As Ethan stood up, he started to pace because his mind was running. "And you knew this whole time?" "Yes," Isla said honestly, "but I didn't agree with what she did. She wouldn't tell me, even though I begged her to. She didn't want you to feel stuck." Putting his hand on his face, he tried to take in what she had said. "Why are you telling me this now?" Isla said, "Because you deserve to know. Charlie also needs to know his dad. Ethan is a great kid, smart, nice, and full of life. He's great about Clara and you." It hurt Ethan's chest to think about all the times he had missed. The first steps, the first few words, the important points he didn't even know to look for. And Charlie, who grew up without a father while Ethan had been by himself for years. His voice was rough as he said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," she said. "I only wanted you to know the truth. You decide what to do with it." There was a moment of silence. The weight of the talk was on both of them. Ethan finally spoke, and his voice was firm. "Thank you, Isla, for telling me." After the call was over, he sat down on his couch and stared out the window at the city. Anger at Clara for not telling him this, guilt for not being there for Charlie, and a deep, aching sadness for all the time they had lost were all going through his thoughts. That night, I couldn't fall asleep. He thought back on all the times he had spent with Clara and Charlie, But this time he saw everything through a different lens. The picture in her bag, her hesitations and deflections, and how Charlie had unintentionally brought them closer together. Now it all made sense. It hurt even more than before, though. By morning, Ethan knew he couldn't just sit there with this information. He had to talk to Clara about it so he could hear her side of the story and figure out why she had done what she did. When he got to her flat, he knocked hard and determinedly. When Clara opened the door, she saw him and her eyes got really big. She spoke with some worry in her voice when she asked, "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He said, "We need to talk." And there was no way to argue with that. Clara thought for a moment and looked back into the room. Look, do you think I don't feel bad about what I did?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I've thought about telling you 1,000 times. I told myself over and over that it was too late, that you had moved on and didn't need this in your life." Ethan paced around the small living room and ran his hand through his hair. He said, "It wasn't just about me. It had to do with Charlie. Don't you think he should get to know his dad?" Clara said, "Of course he does." But her voice broke. But I didn't know what to say. "Ethan, he's happy. He's a good kid who's already been through a lot. It was important to me not to upset him." Ethan stopped walking back and forth and turned to look at her. His face became less stern. "Clara, I'm not here to take him away from you. I want to be a part of his life. I don't want to miss anything else because I've already missed so much." She thought for a moment, her hands twiddling in her lap. She said in a low voice, "It's not that easy. Charlie doesn't know that you're his dad. He sees you as a nice park ranger. If we tell him the truth, what will happen? What if it makes him feel lost or like everything he knows is false?" Ethan said, "We'll figure it out together. But I can't act like he's not my son all the time. He needs to know the truth. I want to really get to know him." The sound of small footsteps echoed down the hallway before Clara could answer. When Charlie walked in the doorway, he was holding Max's leash and rubbing his eyes. "Mom," in an interested voice, he asked, "what's going on?" Clara quickly wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Ethan just came over to talk." He got very happy when he saw Ethan. "Ethan, are you here to watch Max do more tricks?" Ethan laughed, and the boy's excitement made his heart warm. "We'll see later. What about you? How are things going?" Charlie smiled and said, "Good. After work, we're going to the park. Are you also going?" The question caught Clara off guard as she tensed. She was about to answer, but Ethan spoke first. He looked over at Clara and said, "I'd love to, as long as your mom doesn't mind." He looked at Clara with wide, hopeful eyes. "Please, Mom, do you think Ethan can come?" Clara wasn't sure what to do as she looked back and forth between her son and Ethan. She finally let out a small sigh and signed. "Okay," she said in a low voice. "He can come." A cheer went up from Charlie, who then ran back to his room to get ready. He left Clara and Ethan alone again. Even though there was a lot of stress in the air, they seemed to understand each other without saying a word. "Thank you," Ethan said in a low voice. Even though Clara nodded, her face stayed confused. "This doesn't mean I'm ready to tell him everything," she stated. "Not yet." "I get it," Ethan said. "But I'm not leaving, Clara. I'm here for you and Charlie." Not long after that, they were back at the park. Charlie and Max ran ahead, and Charlie laughed as Max chased a ball. Clara and Ethan walked together, and the weight of what they had said was still between them. After a long pause, Clara said, "You're okay with him?" "It's Charlie, I mean. He likes you." Ethan said, "I like him too. He's a great kid, and he deserves the best." Clara put her hands on the strap of her bag and looked down. "I've tried my best to give him that." Ethan honestly told her, "You've done a great job. I can see how much he loves you." Clara gave a small smile, and her face became softer. "Thank you." There was peace in the air as they watched Charlie play. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt hope. Hope for himself. Hope for everyone. "Hey, Ethan." He waved him over as Charlie called out, "Come play with us." Ethan looked at Clara, and she nodded. She then made a timid smile with her lips. He ran over to join Charlie and Max. His laughing mixed with the boys as they played. Clara watched them from the bench. Her heart hurt with fear and hope, two emotions she hadn't let herself feel in years. It's possible that this will work. Ethan's life changed quickly over the next few weeks. He started making time in his busy routine to spend with Charlie, just like he said he would. At first, they only went on simple trips, like to the park, threw frisbees with Max in the afternoons, or ate ice cream together while Charlie told them stories about school and his favorite video games. Every moment for Ethan was a new discovery that showed him a boy who was so full of energy, wonder, and lifelong excitement. The bond between them grew easily, and soon Charlie was looking forward to Ethan's visits with a joy that made Clara no longer be afraid. At first, she stood back and watched them together because she didn't know how to fully include Ethan in their lives. She had put up her walls with great care, but over time, they started to fall apart little by little. It was the same for Ethan. He was changing. His career, the never-ending search for success, and the empty wins that came with it, had ruled his life for years. But now that he was juggling meetings with trips to the park or picking up the kids from school, he realized how much he had been missing. His goals changed, and so did his ideas about the kind of life he wanted to build ahead of time. After Charlie went to bed one night, Ethan and Clara sat in her small apartment living room together. In the background, there was soft TV, but neither of them paid much attention to it. Clara broke the pleasant pause by saying, "You're good with him. He is happier now that you are there. He may have always known something was missing, but he didn't know what it was." While Ethan smiled, there was a hint of sadness in his face. "What a nice kid, Clara. I wish I had known sooner. I'm sorry I missed so much." Clara spoke softly as she looked down at her hands. "I know it was wrong of me to keep it from you. You made me think I was safe, but now I see I was wrong. I'm sorry." When Ethan reached out, his hand touched hers. "It's important that we're here now for him. That's all I need, to be there for him and help him work this out." Clara raised her eyes to meet him, and they were filled with feelings. "I want that too." From that point on, they started to figure out how to co-parent. There were awkward moments, heated arguments, and times when the past seemed like it might get in the way of their growth. But they also had victories together, like seeing Charlie do well in school, enjoying his birthday with him, and learning how much fun it is to just be a family, even if it wasn't how they had planned. It took a while for Ethan to learn to let go of the constant expectations of his job. He learned to trust his team more and delegate more tasks. This was the first time he found a balance that didn't feel like giving up anything. He felt strong and clear after spending time with Charlie. It grounded him in a way he hadn't thought possible. The three of them went back to the park where it all began on a sunny afternoon. Charlie led Max ahead of him and laughed loudly as the dog chased a ball. After him, Ethan and Clara walked behind him together. They took slow, easy steps. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Ethan looked at Clara and asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but I try not to think about it too much. The important thing is where we are now. I'm okay with that for the first time in a long time." A smile tugged at the edges of Ethan's lips as he nodded. "Me too." They walked over to a bench and sat down to watch Charlie play. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the warmth of the sun, and the sight of their happy son gave them a sense of peace. It didn't feel as heavy to think about the past or the future at that time. Even though it wasn't perfect, it was theirs. That was enough. We were reminded that life is full of second chances as the sun went down on this emotional trip. Making their way back to each other wasn't easy for Ethan, Clara, and Charlie, but it was worth every step. Their story shows how powerful forgiveness is, how strong love is, and how important it is to be there for the people who mean the most. Did this story touch your heart? Share your thoughts and comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how powerful was this tale? Smash that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story that stirs your soul. For more heart-racing, emotional tales, tap the end screen now.